Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't explain to you the irony of speaking about something called the tipping point after what I've been through for the past 6 months. And for those of you that don't know, I kind of tipped off a snowmobile, so I'm going to be presenting today from a chair. And you know, like all things, we learn things from different parts of our lives that are applicable to other things that we do. And so as we ventured off on this beautiful sunny day, we had a vision of what our day was going to be like. We had a plan of where we were going to go. We decided to start to execute our plan, and I veered off a little bit in a way that I thought I knew where I was going, and went with great confidence and reasonable speed, and it didn't turn out the way I expected. Fortunately, had a good team with me and had some survival equipment with us, and a lot of blessings that caused me to be able to be here today to talk to you a little bit about where we are with the tipping point of server-based gaming. So kind of my summary from that experience is know where you want to go, survey the place you're going, go slowly before you go fast, evaluate along the way and make adjustments as quickly as you can. Be prepared to fail fast. Have the survival equipment you need in case you make mistakes, and make sure you have a good team of people around you as you embark on your journey. And so as I sat in kind of recovery and thought, you know, what can I take away from this to make sure it doesn't happen again? And what can I take away from it that I can use in other parts of my life? You know, it's not dissimilar to many of the things we go through with implementing technology, and I opened 11 casinos from ground up, responsible for everything that had a wire and a chip in it, and so we had many of the same things happen, whether it was a server crashing or a snowmobile, they all happen. But I want to talk for a minute just about this event and Casino Enterprise Magazine. When Peter had the vision for this magazine, we talked on the phone several times. It was about 9 years ago now, Peter? And I talked to him about publications that I read and publications that I look forward to getting and publications that I actually saved as reference materials. And two of them at the time were called Fine Woodworking, and the other was called Harvard Business Review. And to this day, I have every copy of Fine Woodworking that was ever printed. And because the knowledge that is in them is timeless. And you know, gaming is a slow-moving industry in many ways. And I had the privilege of working with Randy Adams when he was with Anchor Gaming, and he came to speak to us at Harris, and he said, you know, the great thing about being in gaming is it's not hard to be a visionary. And the reason he was able to say that was because the way we adopt technology and the way it comes into gaming is slower than many places. And we expect it to be faster than it really is. And so we'll talk about that a little bit in the next hour. I wanted to start first with what I consider to be the definition of a networked floor, because we've been talking about this now since about 2002, 2003, in events like this, where in 2003, Michael Pollack, that writes for The Observer on the East Coast, said that server-based gaming is more than a futuristic mantra, and it's hurtling towards reality. So what we know today is that hurtling is defined as something longer than 7 years. We're not sure what it is, but we know it's longer than 7 years, because we're not there yet. And there's a number of very good reasons of why we're not, and so I'll explain some of those things to you. But for me, the network floor of the future involves two different things that are fundamentally different than what we've done in the past. The first is bi-directional communication to electronic gaming devices. Our world is one of distrust. And so, you know, some regulators are actually considered to be agencies of disapproval. That's the way their charter starts. And the intention is to ensure that the public is protected and taxes are collected for the places where we're privileged to offer gaming. And that makes sense. But the implication of that is that we have to prove trust before it's granted to us. And so our networks were all designed originally to do only one thing, and that was to suck data out of devices. We couldn't do anything pushing communications, commands, or data down to the floor. No media, no content, nothing. So we were able to pull meters, and so we figured out that by capturing those meter deltas, we could affect game integrity, but we could also do player ratings. And those things started to happen in the 80s. And in 1993, in Joliet, Illinois, was the first time a slot system was actually required by law to open a casino. Prior to then, they were all optional. And it's important to understand that slot systems had been around at that point for 10 or 15 years or more, starting out with Hollerith cards that had holes in them before mag stripes. And so it's important to understand that it took us 9 to 10 years before a system was actually deemed required to operate a business. It took 9 to 10 years to get bill acceptors in slot machines. One would think that that would be a disruptive technology when you're allowing customers to not handle coin and put bills in games faster than they ever had been able to. But it took 9 to 10 years for bill acceptors to be commonly available. In 1994, as I was opening casinos, we were still arguing with general managers whether or not we should put stools at every slot machine. You would never think about opening a restaurant without a chair at every table. And we were arguing about whether or not we should have a stool at every slot machine. So as we think about the kind of technology we're talking about, a stool's $200 or $300 to put in front of a slot machine. Today we're talking about $4,000 to $5,000 per device by the time you figure out the network cost, a hunk of the server, software applications, all the things that are necessary to put this bidirectional communication on the floor is substantial. And so if it was only 10 or 15 years ago we were arguing about stools, imagine the arguments about should we show the Super Bowl on every game on the floor on Super Bowl Sunday? And how will it affect win per unit? These are discussions that are going to be much more difficult to get discrete answers to, and there's not going to be clear data to support them, but I promise you that debate will happen in your property at some point in the future. So, network floor of the future, bidirectional communication to the game where we can actually push down content and we can interrogate the end device, which today, fascinating, we can't. You would think that in this day and age we'd be able to interrogate every EEPROM on the floor to understand whether or not it was an expired chip or whether it was the correct chip or whether or not it was the chip that was supposed to be in that game. But today we still can't. When I managed slot machines, and at that time it was about, 40,000 devices for a company in gaming. If I was asked to check those chips, I'd start at one property, and by the time I was done, I'd have to start over again at the first property because I didn't know if somebody changed a chip in the 2 months it took to count all the chips. So you never knew whether or not you had integrity at the chip level. We've been talking about this for over a decade, and it's still not there yet. And it's not because of intent, and it's not because of the complexity of the technology. It's just that it has many, many components that get there in order to provide that bundle package. The digital gaming device that's going to connect to these is going to change over time. And as we've sat in these sessions, you've heard hundreds of different descriptions and probably 10 or 20 definitions, from thick client to thin client to all types of differences in between. And what it implies is a difference between standalone computing and computing where we can actually talk to this end device and interrogate it on a network in a way that we've never been able to do before. And some of those will have massive CPUs and massive storage, and they'll have lots of different sophisticated hierarchies in there for controlling security and when games are turned on and when games are turned off. And others will be very thin clients, and basically all they'll do is show the application layer and the results of an outcome. And in many cases, that's referred to as central determination gaming. And as we sit here today and we say, well, this is all the future, the reality is all these things exist somewhere in some representation, small or large, in the world. And so if you want to see central determination, everybody here seen a central determination system? Yes? How many people have seen a Class II game? Look at how many hands went up. Different than the first answer. Class 2 is by definition a central determination game. A lot of people don't know that Class 2 in many ways has led server-based gaming in the US because it had to. It's the only way you can do Class 2. It's connected to a server. The outcomes are determined there because you're competing against other people playing bingo, and the results are shown on a screen. The interesting thing is in Class 2, there were lessons to be learned about accounting and moving data and creating a common customer experience in Class 2 that were learned in Class 3 in the 1980s as we put in player tracking. But because of the demand for the product and speed at which it came to market and the vendor structure, the linkage of all that data at the server level came second and the product came first. And that was fine. If you go to Sweden or you go to Norway, you'll see central determination and distributed route operations as well as venue-based. And in those cases, it is thin client where there's basically just the application outcomes and the presentation layer are shown to the customer. And so there's lots of examples like that. And I've been around long enough to actually share an experience with you that many of you may not have even been in the industry at the time. And that was a company, I believe the name was called CashTech, that came out of New York. It was owned by the Lindo family. And they developed a server-based gaming application in the 80s. And it was demonstrated, in fact, presented to Nevada and New Jersey. But it was adopted in Australia, and it became known as Tabaret. And the Tabaret system in Australia was server-based. You could adjust promotions by time of day, day of week. You could adjust games. You could turn games on. You could turn games off. You could do all of the things, many of the things that are being envisioned today. And you can't find it today. It's gone. And one of the reasons it's gone is because it was a great infrastructure and it was a brilliant concept, but it failed on content. And as soon as casino-style games came into that market, this product died. And it was an interesting example because you may see on panels, even as you're here this weekend or this week, a discussion about what will the game look like? Will it be a neutered box? Will it look like my desktop and I'll have 24 shortcuts to find my favorite game? Or will it have 250 shortcuts? And I've never understood how you can have 250 things and call it a shortcut. But when the point here is that there was a lesson learned there, and that was that if efficient infrastructure and the ability to change games quickly was the panacea, that product would still be there. It was supplanted by games that had high marketing appeal, that had high recognition, that had some attribute that made you want to walk up to it and experience it from 150 feet away, even though you didn't even know what it did. And when we look at Game King and Game Makers and other multi-game boxes that are out there today, the question is, why is there not a casino that has 1,000 of those and no other product? And anybody that's run those games understands that any 2 of the 10 programs on there make you 80 to 90% of your revenue, and all the rest don't add up to a game that could stand alone on the floor in terms of win per unit. And so there are lessons to be learned as we start to think through, why does it take time for these kind of products to come to market? Are there lessons that we can learn from other experiments and other parts of the world where these things are already being done? And the answer is yes. And so, you know, the topic of this, and I talked about it internally at the company where I work at Bally, and, you know, are we at the tipping point? And, you know, a tipping point implies a number of things. And I want to talk a little bit about that as we frame the discussion. But before I do that, I want to reflect back to 2008 when Peter invited me here, and I pulled out my presentation from that point in time. And the topic that year was called From Basics to Ballistics. And so we started with the foundational things of the technology and running a casino, and how we use information to do better marketing, how we use it to improve service, how we use it to improve revenue. And there were 2 things in there that I thought were worthy of discussing again. One was the concept of technology inevitabilities, things that are going to happen whether we in this room choose to do anything or not. There's no question that the quality of media that we can purchase and experience is increasing every day. And so as you look at HD, as you look at the quality of the television images that are now broadcast, you know, the media quality is increasing at an exponential rate at this point in time. The use of media to market to us is growing all the time. And so as you walk down a concourse in an airport and it knows your gender and which ad to show you as you're going down the walkway on the people mover, that's an example of how the linkage between facial recognition and media will show you what somebody wants you to see. And I'm not making that up. Those kinds of things are being done today. The idea of marketing within other products or within other types of media is inevitable. Does anyone in this room ever watch a show called American Idol? Coke is a sponsor, yes? Do you know that the judges are actually drinking Coca-Cola while they're sitting there? Does anybody believe that Paula Abdul drank Coke on that show? No. The point is that that's the beginning of what is called advertiser-sponsored content. And you're starting to see it more and more as you see these little advertisements come up on television while you're in the middle of a show, and a little snipe comes up that tells you what's coming next so that you don't even think about changing the channel. Or that you call someone in your household and say, hey, did you know what's coming on at 9 o'clock? Those things are going to happen. The difference about that type of advertising compared to gaming is we know who's watching the screen. So think about how many millions of dollars are spent every year to pay for advertising at NASCAR. Home Depot pays for a car. They pay for a driver. The car goes around, people watch it. They have no idea who it is. They have no way to correlate who saw the car and whether or not it made a difference in them consuming that product. We have a very, very different model. We essentially have the name and address, gender, household worth, projected lifetime value if we're a sophisticated casino, of people that give us somewhere between 60 and 80% of our gaming revenues. So we have the ability, when that card is in the game, to do some extraordinary types of connecting between that customer and things they might like to consume. So this technology that's being used outside of gaming will, over time, migrate onto our floors. And the technology that we can demonstrate today starts to paint a picture of what that would look like. It's not all there today, but I would say we are at the early adopter phase of the technology that will enable it. The other thing is about market inevitabilities. Gaming will expand. This is the perfect time for gaming to expand. And gaming doesn't expand because governments think people don't have enough to do on Saturday night. That's not why gaming expands. Gaming expands because governments don't have enough money and they're trying to create jobs. And there's really never been a time that that's been more evident since the early 90s and then since the revival of Atlantic City in '78 that that's the case. And so you're now starting to see states that never considered gaming, not only considered gaming, but you're seeing other states that have already accepted gaming, accept different styles of gaming. And so if you look at Illinois today, they're looking at route operations. If you look at Greece, they're talking about 45,000 additional devices in addition to the casinos they already run. And so it's going to start to look more like Nevada. And so that you're going to have distributed gaming and you're going to have venue-based gaming, much like Canada. And so the market inevitabilities are that gaming will expand. At the same time, we're at the most difficult time, in our economic history since the Great Depression. And so people are trying to make better and better decisions with the data that they have. Everybody is spending marketing money. The question is, am I spending it right? Everybody is spending some money on their gaming inventory. The question is, are they spending it right? And how will they know that they did? When we look at the size of the market, I think there's many markets that are going to actually contract. And so 2 or 3 of the most successful projects I was ever involved in were actually right-sizing casino floors to the market. And so this right-sizing, this adjusting of product, and maybe even most importantly, the adjusting of price to meet this market is something that you're going to see. And so when we talk about networked floor of the future or server-based gaming, one of the things that's often talked about is the ability to adjust price. And when you speak about price to most slot folks or casino operators, the first thing they think about is hold percent. And hold percent is invisible pricing. It's experiential, but it's invisible. It's like me asking anybody in this room, if you have a good bottle of wine, whether it's 11% alcohol or 13% alcohol, and I challenge anybody in the room to have a palate that's distinctive enough to tell me that. And I would even challenge you more to say, and you can only do it on one taste. That's like judging hold percent with $1 in a dollar game. There's no human that can do it. And so, but what they can see is the price that they pay and the amount of time they get on the device. So this weekend I came in early and went to dinner with my wife at a restaurant that had a fixed price menu. They had obviously thought about the market. It's August in this part of the country. It's real hot, not a lot of demand for restaurants. They came up with a fixed price menu that obviously they figured out how to make money off or they wouldn't be doing it. But it was an incredible value. We were never rushed. Right to the point where we were paying our bill, he said, "Here's your bill, not in a hurry, relax, enjoy your coffee." Never felt pressured, even though we were getting a great price value for our dinner. And the question is, if we had the ability to adjust price on any or every game on our casino floor based on the economic situation we're in, what would we do and why? Unfortunately, all the technology is not out there to answer those questions yet, but the parts are there to be integrated. And that's where we are right now. We're at the beginning of being able to do those. And you go, wow, that's radical. Well, it's not radical. It's what we've been doing on table games for the last 100 years. It's what a good pit boss does. They walk around the floor and they say, oh, too many $5 games, take those 2, make them 10s, do it on the next change of dealer, done. Right? They adjust the minimums on the tables. They adjust the maximum on the table. They adjust the denomination on the table. Yet we don't do any of that. People revenue manage their restaurants every day of the week. Everybody knows you pay $8 for chicken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 7 o'clock you're going to pay $14 for the exact same plate of food because of supply and demand. We do the exact same thing in hotels every day. People in Vegas right now are actually, upset because they've actually sold their rooms too cheap, too far in advance to conventions, because now that the market comes back, they could get $120 instead of $89 because they panicked and sold the rooms out last year instead of waiting for the demand to come back. And so those are all the kind of things that we should be able to do on the casino floor, and we don't, but we will. So those are some of the market inevitabilities that we're going to see. One of the other ones that we'll see is self-service. I think this year like $1.7 trillion of commerce will take place on self-service devices, where an employee is never involved. And there's certain times in a casino when you want customers to be able to serve themselves. You want them to be able to be efficient. You don't want them to have to worry about, if I get up from this game and leave it, I'm going to give away the money that I invested in this device. And Dean's going to walk up and win the $2,000 that I know I should have had because I was playing this game for the last 45 minutes and I wanted to go outside and have a smoke break. Interestingly, that's one of the things we're getting requests for now. Is we used to get requests for game reservation capability so that people could go to a restroom. Now, because of many smoking regulations, we get asked to cap a game so that people can go outside, have a smoke, and come back in. So the market inevitabilities are driven by many things, both inside and outside of gaming. But those are some of the things that I think we can expect. To put this again in context about technology evolution cycles, it takes decades for technology to move from a vision to actually general availability and wide-scale implementation. And there's tons of examples of this in our lives, but there's some of us in this room that remember rotary phones. And when touch-tone phones came in, it probably took 20 to 30 years before rotary phones stopped being adopted or sold. But that did not mean they weren't supported. Pulse phones are still supported almost everywhere, in spite of the fact that touch-tone digital phones have been around for probably 40 years. Similarly, analog and digital television, this last year it was mandated to go to digital, but guess what? For $29.95, all of us taxpayers supported people who wanted to maintain their old analog TVs by letting them buy a $29.95 device that would let their digital convert backward to a television that might have been 30 years old. The government didn't say, on this day there will be no more capability to use your analog television. They said there will be a way to be backward compatible, but there will also be a way to move forward into digital television. So as these things move, we start with a vision, and then we move to technology proof of concept. The gap between those periods of time can be years, between the vision and the first technology proof of concept. We're working on some technology that we've now had in our lab for almost 4 years. I don't expect the stuff to come to market for the next 12 to 24 months in any meaningful way. And when it does, it'll come first in technology proof of concept, then it will go to alpha test. An alpha test is where we literally take things that prove that the stuff can work, but isn't anywhere close to commercial viability. It literally can be a green printed circuit board that somebody soldered up, and we do 10 of them and we try it. By the time we get to beta, which follows alpha, we are now starting to try and commercialize our first instance of the technology, but it often is throwaway technology, because you learn the things that you have to do differently to actually make it available and reliable on a large scale. After beta, we move to controlled introduction. And that's where, even on a casino floor, you will start a controlled introduction into banks of games versus areas or versus zones. And you will start to march down this path of implementation, trying to test out a couple of different things. How does this technology respond under volume? There's everybody in this room that's ever implemented gaming technology has an example of where it worked in the lab and it failed on the floor. Everybody. And it fails for several reasons. One is the environment in which we test it is not the same as our lab and where we run it. And so we test it in one area and then we move it to another place and say, well, yeah, it's all the same except for the network. Yeah, it's all the same except for the games. Yeah, it's all the same except for. And so now we're implementing in an environment that's different than the test. And the second is volume. And so we often implement in places where we can't replicate the real volume of the casino floor. And then all of a sudden Saturday night comes and people's, cell phones are going crazy because we can't, get tickets out, or we can't do ratings or whatever it is. It's because we didn't understand the environment and the volume peaks and demands that could cause things to crash. And then the last one probably that we get into issues with is related to latency, and when things don't communicate at the speed or the way that we think they do. And all of these things are absolutely critical as we start to move to these mission-critical bidirectional network floor of the future. And we're going to learn at each step of the way, but trust me, this is not going to be plug and play where you do it once and therefore it's guaranteed it's going to work every place the same way, because we all run our businesses differently and with different technology. So the kind of state that we're in right now, I think, is really at the early adopter phase. We aren't really at the tipping point at this stage, at least in North America, as much as we are at the stage of early adoption. And so there are really good examples of very powerful high-speed Ethernet floors that are starting to be used for things that we haven't been able to do in the past. What are some examples of those things? Drink ordering on demand, being able to actually order a drink at your game. And for a likes and dislikes database to know your 4 favorite drinks. Most humans have 4 favorite drinks, but not more than 6. They have preferences, but if you ask them by category, it's somewhere between 4 and 6. And so that we're starting to be able to link the likes and dislikes in customers to an element of self-service, to actually improved efficiency for casino operators and beverage servers. The other thing that we're starting to see is some uses of things like streaming video. And in this case, it's kind of fascinating because it's much like other parts of our business that I've seen where we have beliefs that are not necessarily based on facts. And the example of this is television while people are playing games. So huge fear. If we put TV on a gaming device, people will not gamble as much and they'll just come in and put their card in because they'd rather watch TV in my air-conditioned casino than at home. And in fact, the 3 examples that we're familiar with where this has been tested, that in fact has not happened. Could it happen? Yes. But the people that tried this were very thoughtful and they were very judicial in the way that they used streaming video. And they were trying to use it to market to a very specific customer segment to drive play on very specific times. And in all 3 cases, it worked. With win per units going up somewhere in the 10 to 25% range on those specific days when compared to similar days where they were not offering streaming video. So there are these kind of examples that are starting to happen. The other thing that you're starting to see is a change in the makeup of the end users. And for those of us that are in this room that have sold systems in the past, the people that sold systems at one time talked to IT. And IT was the representative of the business. And so IT would listen to all the end users and they would come in and represent the business and say, this is what we want. And oh, by the way, it has to be on this platform or that platform and it has to support this network or that network or I won't buy it. Then we started to see more representation from gaming operations and particularly slots. And so slots wants to understand how does this connect to the game, what does it do for player tracking, how do I maintain it, all of the things that slot folks want to know. Today, rarely do we sell to an enlightened customer where the marketing people are not in the room or asking for their own meetings. And for years, there's been a question of who's in charge of marketing on the casino floor. And so the slot guy goes out and buys a $20,000 sign with a progressive meter, and the marketing person comes in and puts up a foam core sign for a 2-for-1 buffet in front of the $20,000 game, and now it's the Hatfields and the McCoys. And so it's a question about whose space is this, and how do I market to it? You know, I can't see my progressive, and you're trying to sell your buffet, and your buffet sign isn't lit, and it's, you know, I got to put these candle holders up there, and then they can't see the candles, and I got these things in the way, and you know, who's in charge of it? And is it your guys or our guys? And who does this? And so there's never, in my experience in casino operations, I didn't see the kind of collaboration that we're going to need in the future to think about marketing on the casino floors. And one of the best examples is digital signage, where you'll often go into a facility and you'll find out that there's actually a group that controls digital signage on the floor and a group that controls it everywhere else. And the very same information about the fight or the boxing event may have a different set of data. It may have a different look. It may have a different feel. And so as we think about resort marketing and this digital kind of media thing, you're starting to see organizations realign themselves because they have to reflect these new distribution channels and ways to communicate to the guest. And what's really going to break this open is when marketing people have a choice of giving somebody $10 in the mailbox or giving them $10 while they're playing the game. Or whether they give them $10 between their first game and their second game. There's not any casino that can't tell you whether their customers win or lose over the last 6 trips they made to a casino. There's not any casino that can't tell you in what order they won and lost. But a customer that lost on 2 of the last 6 trips as opposed to have lost on 2 of the first 6 trips is a very different customer. That's an at-risk customer. That's a highly at-risk customer. And if you were going to reinvest in marketing at any time, you don't have to kiss the winners. They're already happy. You need to know when to invest in people when they're at that tipping point of dissatisfaction when you might lose them. And the technology that we're talking about as we move forward with these network floor of the future will be able to allow you to do that. Some people are talking about doing it inside the game, almost making it reflexive, and I have great caution about that because I've been around long enough to see some of the lawsuits on reflexive gaming. But there is no question that we can market to people after games, between games, when they start a game or when they end a game, because we already do those things. So the things that will be adopted from a pragmatic standpoint are the things that we already do. So if I already configure a slot machine and I'm a slot tech and I can walk up to a screen and put my card in and change the denomination and change the line configuration and change the credit configuration, then to be able to do that electronically and more efficiently, and by the way, with a higher level of integrity and auditability, it would be logical that regulators would support that kind of thing before they would support something like reflexive marketing reinvestment while you're in the middle of a game that has a defined beginning and end state. It's logical that they would be seen as marketing money. If I'm already giving somebody $10 in the mailbox, if they give them that same $10 at the game after a game session has ended, it's no different than sending it to the mailbox. It's just that it didn't take 60 days to do it. So those are some of the pragmatic kind of applications that we see in this marketing at the point of play we think is going to be one of the really significant ones. If for no other reason, in theory, the ability to increase revenue is infinite. But labor savings occurs generally once. And so there is no such thing as 110% labor efficiency. You're either efficient or you're not. And once you achieve 100% efficiency, you can't necessarily go any better than that. And so I think that you're going to see some of the real focus is going to come on this pricing and marketing to the player on an individualized basis. The value that we can expect from this really fits into several different categories. I've given examples of some of them, but the first is customer service. We should be able to improve customer service in ways that we haven't before. There's no reason that a bill acceptor should ever be full in front of a customer. There's no reason that a printer should ever be out of paper in front of a customer. Ever. Every one of us knows how many bills go into a can per day. We can calculate how many go in per hour. We can calculate the busiest days we've ever had in the history of the casino and know that unless, there's some freak event, there's not more than 1,000 bills that are ever going to go into this can, so we can now do a scheduled drop without the fear of this can being full. We should be able to know in a printer, not whether it has a high or low or medium level of paper, but how long it can go before I have to fill it up. So speaking of not having to be a visionary, remember when we had cars that only had fuel gauges? And now we have cars that'll tell us exactly how many miles we can go before we need gas. We should have that same information on our printers and our bill acceptors. Here's how many hours you should be able to expect to run your casino without filling up your printer or emptying your cash can. We have the data to do this. Just like the dashboard in your car has the data to calculate and adjust itself based on speed and gas consumption, how far you can go. These are not hard things to do, and the beauty of it is the data, The raw data is there to be captured and used. We're just not using it yet. Also, from a customer service standpoint, I find it fascinating in casinos that you have to go to a kiosk and you need a kiosk to find a kiosk. The idea of I'm lost and I'm going to go find something to help me get unlost is archaic. There is technology today that can find you anywhere in the world with a 99.9% confidence rate and have an airlift dispatched to you in 20 minutes. And I share this with you because I've actually done some research on it based on last year's experience. But it's actually called a spot. If we can only show a map on a slot machine of 4 things, most customers will be happy. They want to know, where do I get more money? Where do I find a bathroom? Where do I get some fuel? And how do I get out of this place and get back to my car? After that, they want to know about your, retail shops and what you're showing on Saturday night in the theater or whatever it is. But people have a very, basic set of needs when they're in play. There's no reason we can't show that to a customer today on the game if they choose to see it and help them and improve customer service. Right? And if you want to do the analog survey of this, when you get back to your casino, if any of you have an escalator, well, I'll just take away the escalator. Go ask a security guard what the 10 most common questions are that they get asked a day. Go ask your security guards what are the 10 questions that you get asked every day. And you will immediately find 5 things you could do at a slot machine and make that guy's life security, not information. This discussion about revenue management is going to come, and it needs to come. And it's not just about casinos making more money. It's about adjusting your price by time of day, day of week, and day part. Just like the customer that pays $8 for chicken at 4 in the afternoon versus 14 at night is a different customer. It's not just a different price point. It's a person that can come eat at 4 in the afternoon, that doesn't have to get off work at 5 or 5:30. And the price that that person can pay and is willing to pay is different. It's not just because it was offered at a different price. And so most of our casinos today are built like what I grew up with called department stores, where they tried to have every product that you needed from birth to death. And we try and do that today, but we have very little compartmentalization or departmentalization in our casinos with the exception of denomination and the pits. But that's going to change. And areas of the casino are going to be able to be dynamically changed using all kinds of cool interfaces to systems like Questron and AMX, and actually change the environment by time of day and day of week, and change the price by time of day and day of week and customer segment. And it will come. And we are already starting to see some casinos start to experiment with these kind of things where they're taking sections of the floor and wanting to start to create these laboratories where we can dynamically change them. And the difference to this and Star Wars in Vegas is if you're wrong, you can adjust. So if you look at Family Feud at MGM, if you look at Star Wars at the Hilton, the issue was if you were right for 7 shifts of the week, you failed for 14 others. If you were right for 7 shifts of the week, you failed for 14 others. And you can't afford to do that. It's why South Park failed as a game. Because the people that like South Park are great people. They just don't show up in the middle of the week and on at least 14 of your shifts. And when they do show up, they lease BMWs. They don't own them. They don't have a lot of time. They don't have a lot of money. They aren't present on all 21 shifts of your week. So we're going to be able to get away from games having to be age and gender neutral in order to optimize the revenue, and we're going to be able to start to customize those things by time of day, day of week, and customer segment. The downloading of content was really how a lot of this started, with downloadable games, and this was all the rage in 02 and 03. But there's several components of the concept of downloading games. The first is one of efficiency, and that's for slot techs, and customers really don't care about that. And whether or not you use an EEPROM or whether or not you squirt it down a wire and it sits in memory for a couple of days and then you turn it on, customers don't care about that. But it would be a very efficient way of managing software. And by the way, it's the way we do most of our stuff in back office today. You call the help desk, you tell them you want an application. Most times they put it down on your laptop and you're done. So the idea of this is not very complicated, but it is very foreign, particularly to gaming regulators. What I find exciting is the ability to market a game to the same people at the same time on the same day in 20 different casinos. So if you want to have the grand opening or the grand launch or the premiere of a game, and I tried to do this with every resource I had available when I was running 26 different slot locations trying to launch a game at the same time, the same day, everywhere. And the closest we got was about 2 months, if I remember right. In the future, you'll be able to do that because you'll be able to get the game in library, if you will, and on the day that you choose to turn it on, you'll be able to. So you'll be able to put a huge marketing push behind a particular launch, just like you do a movie, just like you do a car launch. You'll be able to actually coordinate and have a simultaneous presence of that product, which today is impossible to do on a nationwide basis. It's impossible. Unless you wanted to have that game basically be a year to year and a half, you have to time it based on the longest approval it could take you to get that product, and you can't turn it live until then. And most people would say that would be a year to a year and a half, depending on where you do business. The marketing at the point of play, we talked about a little bit, but I think this is the place where we're going to see this intersection. But it requires a collaboration and a use of data that is really unprecedented, because it links the product that the people are playing. You have to link the product. You have to know what they're playing. You have to know what their worth is. You have to understand how to market to those people. And you then have to have closed loop analysis so that you understand whether the decision you made and the program that you launched was in fact successful. So what this implies is you need coordination between your slot management system, your casino management system, your business intelligence system, and your analytical capabilities if you do them in any system other than those three. And that's where the heavy lifting comes in, is the coordination of all of those activities and that data to understand, did we do the right thing, and did it do what we wanted it to do? And we're starting to see some experiments of that. We're starting to see some great measurements come out where we're seeing carded play increase based on certain promotions that are being run, where the marketing segment that was selected was the right one, where overall coin in went up as a result of that, and therefore win per unit went up. And more importantly, the excitement on the casino floor that resulted from the promotion was actually contagious. And I want to just stop on that just for a second on contagious, because there's several things that are happening with technology, and one is that we're making it more private. And so if I have a choice of giving Russ a coupon to win a BMW, or saying you have one electronic entry into a sweepstakes, there's no exchange between us in the second example. There's no way I can shake his hand and hand him a piece of paper and say, thank you for coming, here's your chance to win the car. That's the same with electronic. And we're actually starting to see some examples where kind of what's old is new again. And we're blending some of the great marketing things that took place in concourses and in lobbies and hurricanes for cash and the chickens that play tic-tac-toe, whatever the examples are, the simple examples that make people smile and laugh, and mix them with technology. You know, there are some places where I've gone, I've walked in the door, I've spent 2 hours in a casino, I've lost what I consider to be significant money and never seen an employee. I therefore have no relationship. I had a transaction. And you can't build customer loyalty on those kind of transactions. Slot machines, by definition, are commodities. The definition of a commodity is the same thing, where the only thing is different is price. So somebody that buys 100,000 slot machines a year is going to get a different price than somebody who buys 10,000 slot machines a year. But at the end of the day, it's the same slot machine. So the question is, how do you use this technology to create a differentiated experience on your floor? Michael Tracy in The Discipline of Market Leaders, which was written probably in the 80s now, says that if you're going to be in business, you need to decide how you're going to compete. And he gives you three choices. You can compete on product, you can compete on service, or you can compete as a low-cost provider. The rub is you can't compete on any two. You have to have a number one priority, and then you have to do 2 and 3 just to be in business. But there is no question that Nordstrom competes on service and Walmart competes on price. Nobody ever goes into Nordstrom expecting a good deal. Nobody ever goes into Walmart expecting great service. At least I don't. So the technology that I'm describing can be used for your individual property in any one of those examples. The key is to make sure that there's organizational alignment on what you're trying to accomplish. Because if your boss is trying to compete on service and you think you're trying to compete on low-cost provider, or you think you're trying to compete on product, you're not going to have a great career. And people are going to be disappointed when you buy the technology and it's doing something different than they expected. So in every one of these cases, much like the snowmobile ride, you've got to understand your vision when you wake up in the morning. Then you've got to survey that landscape, and you've got to understand what's out there for you to accomplish your vision. Then you start to plan, and you start to think about what it takes. And for the things I'm describing, you typically start with your network. What's in the floor? What kind of wire do I have? How hard is it to get Ethernet in there? Do I need Ethernet or not to do what we're talking about? In many cases, you don't. If you're going to run promotions on a 2x6 screen and that's what you need in the market you're in, you may not need Ethernet. But trust me, if you're going to run streaming video and try and show a TV show, you are going to need it. So make sure you understand those components. And then be prepared to adjust and fail fast after you've done all your evaluation of your systems and your infrastructure. And at the end, evaluate your organization. Being on the vendor side now, I would tell you that the mistakes we make most often when we go into a project is not understanding the expectation of the customer and their organizational capability. And when we're out of alignment with that at any time, the project's at risk. And if marketing isn't aligned with slots before we get there, the system isn't going to fix that. If the bonus structure, by definition, causes those two groups not to work together, we don't know that and we're in trouble. And we don't know why. And the marketing person may have objectives related to direct mail, and we can't figure out why there's no money to do this marketing thing on the floor, and the slot guy says, I don't have marketing money to do this, and the marketing person says, I don't have marketing money to do this, and we've got this great infrastructure and capability, and there's nobody to write the $10 checks. And the investment doesn't pay off. So, just in summary, we're at a really, really exciting time. Probably, this is now my 30th year in the industry, through a lot of different transitions. I think we're getting ready to get into some of the most exciting times that we've ever seen in the next 10 years. But we are at the beginning. We're at the early stage of adoption. We're not at the end, and we're not at general availability. Just think about this. If G2S and a single CPU approach is required to implement your strategy, The current replacement cycle in North America would have you at 20 to 25 years before you can do the same thing on every game on your floor. So the idea of having a ubiquitous experience across the floor has to be very well thought out in terms of the pragmatic rollout of product based on standards, based on technology strategy, and commercial reality. The likelihood of us getting back to 20% replacement cycles on our floors in the next 24 months is very slim. However, there's technology that can allow us to do exciting things on at least 80–90% of the games you already own. And I hope you take something away from it and that you have a great session. Thank you very much.